What's up everyone, OJ here. Welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be talking about why the Nintendo Switch is the best Nintendo home console of all time, my favorite home console of all time when it comes to Nintendo systems. Now, this is not going to be all Nintendo devices, right? So it's not going to be portables in addition to home consoles, and we're going to go ahead and put the Nintendo Switch in the home console bracket. We'll probably do a portable one, but it won't include the Nintendo Switch as well, since Nintendo considers this a home console you can take on the go, so a hybrid. So we're going to go ahead and consider it a home console for this video, and I'll do a separate one talking about my favorite Nintendo portables of all time. But this little system right here, to me, really gets it done when it comes to Nintendo systems, and there is a number of reasons why. And I want to start off with Fire Emblem Three Houses. I'm not gonna lie, this game kind of pushed it over the edge for me. If you look at what that game has done, and you kind of compare it to some of the other Fire Emblem games, you compare it to what Nintendo's done before on home consoles, first time in over a decade that we've seen a Fire Emblem game on a home console, the amount of content that you get in this game, and I think that is a running thing with the Nintendo Switch. Whenever Nintendo releases a first-party game or a game that they publish, we're just seeing these games packed full of content. You can buy a few games on the Nintendo Switch and literally be set, because there's just so much stuff to do in a lot of these games, first party wise and third party wise. Now, my second favorite Nintendo system of all time is the Super Nintendo, and we will have a ranking at the end, so I will rank all of the different systems. But to me, the Super Nintendo had so many great first party games, but a lot of them, I mean, you could beat pretty quickly. There wasn't as much content in them. They were still good and they had content, but it seems like the Nintendo Switch just continually gets these games that are just content packed in so many different genres and varieties. Now, the thing about the Super Nintendo and even like the NES, those systems had way more third-party support, and I think that's the one weakness that you can kind of put against the Nintendo Switch is like, well, it's not getting all the major third-party support, and that's definitely true, but I think that something that supplements or makes up for that is the fact that it is getting some bigger games that you would have never expected could run on the system. For example, like Doom, or even like Skyrim, the remastered edition of the game that has the increased visuals and all the different content and all that. It's not the 360 version of the game, on top of stuff like Wolfenstein, and also Doom Eternal is coming as well. So there are a number of big Western games on the system, and on top of that, it's getting a lot of these Japanese RPGs that we haven't seen in a long time come to Nintendo home consoles. The last time that we really saw this was probably the Super Nintendo, that we see this consistent flow of Japanese RPGs. The GameCube did have some here and there, but it was missing out on stuff like Final Fantasy. All we got was Crystal Chronicles and maybe something else, but pretty much Crystal Chronicles, that was it. Well, the Switch is getting that Crystal Chronicles game remastered, on top of it getting a bunch of Final Fantasy games. So to me, that gives it the leg up in the RPG department overall, because Super Nintendo had some great Super Nintendo RPGs. Obviously, you have Chrono Trigger, you have Secret of Mana, you have all that stuff, but all that stuff is on the Nintendo Switch, and then some, when you look at Nintendo's first-party output. And I think that's the biggest thing here, because when you're talking about Nintendo system, third-party games are great, and trust me, you need them. That is fantastic, and I want them to be there. But first-party titles are really going to be what people remember. The legacy of a system is how great were those first-party titles. And to me, the first-party games that are on the Nintendo Switch are definitely better than what we saw on the Super Nintendo. Now, don't get me wrong. You have Link to the Past. You have Mario Kart. You have all these great games, Super Metroid. All these fantastic games that were on Super Nintendo, but if you look at what Nintendo's done, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, arguably just as good, if not better, than The Link to the Past. You look at Super Mario Odyssey, arguably just as good, if not better, than Super Mario World. You look at stuff like Fire Emblem Three Houses. The Fire Emblem game that came out on Super Famicom wasn't released worldwide. You look at some of the newer stuff that Nintendo's even licensed, stuff like Mario plus Rabbids, nothing like that on the Super Nintendo. You look at a game like Splatoon, a completely different style that Nintendo's done before. Another game like ARMS, completely different style that Nintendo's done before. Look at Super Smash Brothers. That was not a thing on the Super Nintendo. So there are just so many first-party games and various different genres that really hit hard, especially when you start comparing them direct side by side with the big hitters on the Super Nintendo. Once again, Super Nintendo was great. That's my second favorite system of all time. But when I start stacking up the games one by one and the creativeness of some of the titles that Nintendo's done, it starts to show that, hey, wait a minute, Nintendo Switch actually has just as much, if not actually more, especially when you start considering everything. You start encompassing everything that Nintendo's been doing. Stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torna the Golden Country, Octopath Traveler, publishing that, the new Dragon Quest XI S Definitive Edition with the extra content that's going to be exclusive to the system. There is a ton of stuff on top of stuff like Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet, a lot of Bandai Namco stuff, a lot of Koei Tecmo stuff mixed into there, got a lot of old Capcom stuff, so we're not getting some of the new things, which is definitely a knock because on the Super Nintendo there was more stuff from Capcom, but there was more newer games, so it'd be like Mega Man, but we did get stuff like Mega Man 11 on the Nintendo Switch. So every time that I kind of went by and compared one game to another game, I said, okay, well, the Switch has this, the Super Nintendo had this, or the Super Nintendo had this, but the Switch has this, and this, and this. And to me, it just kept on one-upping, and once again, the only thing that you can really say with the Super Nintendo is that the third party, so it had just like a lot more of the major Western developers and third-party games on there compared to the Nintendo Switch, but there's just been so many re-releases, and there's just been so many games, classics, thrown on the Switch system. In addition to what's upcoming, it's hard to ignore all of that, especially if you look at genres that haven't even really been discovered at that point in time. So for example, a game like Bayonetta, that's on the Nintendo Switch. That style of game didn't really exist. It was more of a 2D action game, right? Or a 2D beat 'em up that we saw back then, but there's nothing like Bayonetta on the Super Nintendo or on any other system outside of like the PS2, that generation, and up with Devil May Cry or God of War, things like that. But Nintendo systems didn't really get games too much like that, or if we did, we got crappy ones like Blood Rain or something like that. So to me, seeing stuff like a Bayonetta, seeing something like Astral Chain, seeing stuff that's coming out on the system that Nintendo's working with partners and just more games coming, it's almost impossible to sit here and say the Switch isn't right up there, if not the best to me. Even look at just this summer right alone. We had Super Mario Maker, a fantastic 2D Mario game to where you can create pretty much anything that you want. You can recreate all the old 2D levels from before. You also look at it right after that. We had a bunch of games come out, but Fire Emblem Three Houses, and then Astral Chain is right on the horizon. But then look at some of the partner stuff. Daemon X Machina coming out September. And then we also have Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. So Nintendo is not only hitting on the older games that are coming out, they're having new style games. They're hitting all the different genres in there, the mech genre, stuff like that, which we did have on the Super Nintendo, Front Mission and things like that, but it's done in a completely different way with online and with cooperative and multiplayer and all that stuff that we're seeing with Daemon X Machina. To me, it's just overwhelming the amount of games that we have to play on the Nintendo Switch and the games that are coming out throughout the rest of the year. And I do have to say, because we never really saw that on Super Nintendo, and the Super Nintendo did have the Super Game Boy, so if you wanted to do that, or even like the GameCube that had the GBA player to where you can play your Pokemon game on that system, but we actually have a Pokemon game, 2 Pokemon games on the Nintendo Switch already, on top of all the other RPG stuff on there. You cannot ignore all of that goodness, and to me, it just really kind of piled up. And I think that the tipping point for me was definitely Fire Emblem Three Houses. That's when I realized, okay, this video needs to be made. I need to talk about this. I think the Nintendo Switch for me is the best Nintendo system of all time. And I think like the super cherry on top or everything like that would be like Super Smash Brothers. We have the GameCube, we have the N64, we have the Wii, we have the Wii U. All of those had Smash Brothers, but this is the ultimate version of that game. Smash Brothers has everything that you would want in a Smash game for the most part, for most of the fans out there. Obviously, the hardcore Melee fans doesn't have quite everything there, but for the most part, it has everything that you would want in the game, or a lot of it, right? The most characters, has so many stages, a ton of stuff that you can do in the game. So for me, having all of that we've talked about so far, on top of the games consistently coming out every single month, on top of the old games that they've already remastered and put out on the system, and it really all started with Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and kind of just snowballed from there with new games or newer entries into franchises, licensed out stuff like we already discussed, Mario plus Rabbids, things like that, finishing off that first year with Xenoblade, or that first calendar year with stuff like Xenoblade. I'm a huge Monolith Soft fan, and to have 2 Xenoblade games within the first 2 years of the system's launch is incredible, is absolutely incredible. Now, my third favorite Nintendo system of all time is the GameCube. The GameCube is my third favorite, and I think the GameCube does a good job of keeping up. There's actually a lot of great stuff on the GameCube. There's a lot of great third-party support on the GameCube, but I think one of the biggest problems is that a lot of these third-party games were starting to be designed for online play, like online multiplayer. And if you bought the GameCube version of that game, there wasn't online. There was barely any games that were online. I think Phantasy Star Online was the only one, or there was like the Phantasy Star games. There might have been another one or two, but you know what? For the most part, there was nothing. So a lot of these games that were coming out that were multiplayer, you didn't have online play, despite the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 versions having online multiplayer. So it was tough for me to play them on the GameCube back then when the PS2 had online and the online was free. So I bought a lot of those third-party games on the PS2 so I can play the game online for free, like Madden, for example, or if there was a shooter that came out or anything like that. It was like, hey, PS2 online play and for free. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and go with that version. So I think that's one of the bigger issues with the GameCube. And I also think that it didn't get enough Japanese RPGs. So I think that's the reason why that it's number 3. Now, they did get stuff like Skies of Arcadia, and I also got Tales of Symphonia, which are also great games. We don't have Skies of Arcadia on the Nintendo Switch, but we do have Tales of Vesperia, which is my favorite Tales game of all time, on top of a bunch of other cool Bandai Namco RPGs as well. Dragon Ball Z, all of that stuff was coming. We actually got good Dragon Ball Z games on the Nintendo Switch compared to kind of what they were doing back on the GameCube and everything like that, because the games kind of sucked on the GameCube back then. But overall, to me, when I stack up all the games and I really start examining from game to game, from year to year, and the consistency that we're seeing here, on top of actually what the system is, like the fact that you can take it anywhere that you want, and then you can also play it at home, so it gives you more time, more opportunities to play all of these big games. I think, to me, it's pretty much eclipsed it. And if anything, I talked about the cherry on top being Super Smash Brothers. I mean, that could easily be Astral Chain as well. But we are coming down to the end here, so let's go ahead and go over my list from top to bottom of my favorite Nintendo systems of all time. This is going to be tough because I'm going to be doing it on the fly, and maybe I'll make a version 2 of this and I'll rearrange some of the bottom, but I know my solid top 3 or 4. So number 1 is the Nintendo Switch. Number 2 is the Super Nintendo. Number 3 is the GameCube. Number 4 is the NES. Number 5 is the Wii U. Number 6 is the N64. And that's kind of pretty much my list here, and I'm going to get crucified for the whole N64 thing. For me, Super Smash Brothers was awesome on the Wii U. Bayonetta was awesome on the Wii U, and I understand that people like the N64 a lot more, and I don't want to sit there and argue about that, guys. I don't want to argue about that too much. It doesn't mean that I hate the N64. It's just my least favorite, just because it was all kind of about like a lot of you know, games. It was cool, but to me, there wasn't enough RPGs. There just wasn't enough RPGs. And at least with the Wii U, we got stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles X. We got Tokyo Mirage Session. There was indie games on their RPGs as well. There was more stuff. Whereas the N64, pretty much, I mean, it had Paper Mario, it had Ogre Battle. There wasn't too many on there. There were some great ones, but there wasn't too many on there. The Wii U definitely had more. So that's kind of how I rank it. But once again, I want to know what you guys' thoughts are when it comes to top Nintendo systems of all time. What is your favorite Nintendo system of all time when it comes to home consoles? We'll do a separate list for portable. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comment section below. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Go to check out the links in the description below. We got Facebook and Twitter. Go ahead and give us a like and a follow on our social media. Hit that like button if you did like this video. Let me know you guys want more content like this going forward in the future. And subscribe to PlayerEssence for this RPG, Japanese, and Nintendo gaming news. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace!